or die. Comply or die. Comply.
Welcome to GRC Uncensored, a new podcast designed to elevate real conversations with GRC professionals, auditors, regulators, and those building programs around it. Your hosts Troy Fine and Kendra Cooley, alongside producer Elliot Volkman, guide unfiltered discussions that dig into the reality of how governance, risk, and compliance function, rather than the rose-colored perspective that's fueled by millions in marketing spend. Now, onto your hosts.
Hello and welcome back to GRC Uncensored. I am Elliot Volkman, your producer, alongside our wonderful hosts, Kendra and Troy, or TJ if you prefer, or maybe you're friendly enough on that. And today we're going to be talking about, and I apologize, I'm probably going to set us up for a little bit of failure at the gate, because I'm going to throw out this phrase, and it's not about this topic. We're going to technically talk about the difference between compliance and security, which means how do we go above and beyond compliance? Because today and in our past episodes, we've chatted about nothing else but the commoditization, especially around things like SOC 2, of compliance. But how do we go beyond that? How do we go above and beyond that? And unfortunately, that does get us into that territory of compliance is not security. Again, that's not the topic. Will keep us hopefully a little closer at bay. But for that, it is now time to introduce our guest, Mr. Robert Wood, or Rob, who is the founder and CEO of Sidekick Security, but he has a long-standing history and hopefully taking a little bit of breather being a CISO and other cybersecurity roles, including some background in AppSec. Do I want to set us up for failure, Troy, or was that the correct business?
We have to ask. I have that. Ask the same question now every episode.
The GPT.
Yeah, that's like our go-to. Now we have to ask it. Other than Kendra already telling us she used it for her March Madness brackets.
I didn't. My husband.
I started asking every guest now, what is the last thing they asked ChatGPT or a similar tool?
The last thing that
It doesn't have to be the last thing. It could be anything that is interesting that you think.
I have two
about your personality.
I have two wildly contrasting GPT prompts that will give you a kind of a sneak peek into me. One is, I'll do the funny one first, then I'll do the serious one after. Is, there's a lot of people like there's this trend on LinkedIn right now, it seems, where you have all these and I don't know if it's just like I look fat in my profile picture or something, but you have all these online fitness coaches, just constantly barraging you. It's, CEO coaches who've never been a CEO and fitness coaches of people who, yeah, they look like they're in shape, whatever. But it's all this online fitness, whatever. And I don't get on Instagram or Facebook or anything much these days. I deleted both from my phone, but I recall in the past, you have David Goggins, just popping up on my feed and just being the just absolute savage that he is, and just doing all these things. So to humor myself, I was I put together a prompt around David Goggins being your live-in roommate and personal trainer, and to just walk you through a day, and nice. just seeing ChatGPT embody the get out of bed, sucker, punk, do this, get stay hard, do that. It was just humorous and funny.
Did it work?
I did 3 days of what it told me to do, and then I was like, nope, make more. I'm not that hard. And the other one is I had to build out a very detailed threat profile that we could use to feed into some penetration testing that we were doing, build out motivations, capabilities, and map that to threat intelligence and attack, MITRE attack techniques and things of that nature. So wildly ends of this, different ends of the spectrum.
Did that work well?
Yeah, no, they both worked great. I got my ass kicked on one hand, and I got, and the second thing worked great.
Can you then take the Goggins bot and insert that into the other effort?
Oh, I think that's a great idea. That's exactly what I'm going to do after we wrap this, is figure out how to blend those two things together.
Crazy. I had a friend tell me yesterday that they're using ChatGPT for therapy. I was like, what? I did not even know that was an option.
Scary at the same time.
Yeah, a little bit. But I was like, okay, it's helping you.
It's definitely cheaper than doing real therapy.
Yeah. I might have to dive into that a little bit more with her at some point and ask, what prompts then I don't know. Scary to me. I think I would probably explode ChatGPT if I started just unloading all of my issues into it. It would probably be like, oh, sorry, we're canceling your account.
Indra broke the internet.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh my
There's
God.
not enough processing power for your issues. Thanks.
That's funny. What was our topic, Elliot? I actually forgot. I think I say that every time.
Going above and beyond compliance, aka security does not equal compliance, or compliance does not equal
Yeah,
security.
I don't even know
Or-
what does that mean though. I'm
or
curious.
not just checking the box. We can set the bar just a little higher. Not higher than what you had just said, Kendra, but like we
Yeah.
can set the higher standard.
I'm curious, Rob. Actually, well, now we'll get to the topic, I guess. Like, what is that? Do you believe this compliance is not equal security? Are you on a certain side of this issue? Do you think it's just clickbait, or what do you think of the whole compliance does not equal security, or does it equal security? Or is
I do think there's a hefty amount of clickbait in that, because there's a lot of very self-righteous security people out there that are very, very proud of their of the work that they do. I think there's it's funny. Like there's nuance in the question, because there's definitely organizations out there that will do the bare minimum stuff to get past an audit, and that's where you have like the commoditization of SOC 2s and all that. Just give me the cheapest damn SOC 2 you can give me, just so I can say I have a SOC 2, and so I can keep doing business and selling stuff. And like that's a thing. And so in that case, you could argue like that's compliance, although not really. It's like paper compliance, but it's not. They might not be secure. But I think for organizations that really embrace the spirit of the controls, which I know is kind of a cheesy, fluffy term, but I'm going to use it anyways. Like the spirit of the controls, let's say something like least privilege, or separation of duties, or strong authentication, or whatever. I'm not going to cite specific control references on a call with a bunch of people who are in the audit field, because I'm going to look like a jackass. But if you like take the spirit of the control and put it into practice and really invest in making it mature, and you're kind of looking at your implementation from a people, a process, a technology standpoint, like really looking at your maturity, then I think compliance and security are they kind of go hand in hand. And that I think is a wonderful thing. I think one of the biggest differences though that I see about security is not equal to compliance is like compliance is a much easier conversation for security leaders or security teams to have internally to their peers who are not in the discipline, to try to gin up budget, to drive prioritization, to influence, all of that stuff, because it's a cost of doing business type of activity, versus security, which feels like in very few places can a team really articulate like how much is enough, and it's always this like ambivalent. You have this kind of like invisible threat that's like looming over everything, and it's very very ominous, and that does not really bode well for board level conversations or an agenda item on the executive meeting, and it's just very intangible in many ways, or it's hard to make it tangible. And so I know that's a really long answer to the question, but I guess to summarize, my take is if the spirit of the controls are kind of really looked at and invested in and kind of taken to heart, then I think the two are very symbiotic and similar as far as like the protection and benefit they add to an org, but they have different kind of communicative purposes in an organization. And that is something that I think too many security people poo-poo on. They're like, compliance. We don't care about all that. And that's really unfortunate. And I know people who are like hardcore on the compliance front that, have almost a similar reaction to, although I feel like compliance folks are much more accepting and ingratiating of the security people than the opposite. But yeah, we need to be leveraging these tools to get more stuff done, in my opinion. And I feel like it's an opportunity wasted for teams and leaders who don't do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'm glad you used the word tangible, because that was actually exactly what I was thinking the whole time that you were speaking, is that compliance is often something that is so much more tangible to individuals who don't necessarily have the security background. If I am able to take a compliance framework and say, we have to do X, Y, and Z in order to meet this, that's easy. Like, it's one-to-one, right? It's okay, cool. We have to have vulnerability scanning in place because this says that we have to, versus starting with just security and saying, hey guys, we need vulnerability scanners in place. Why? What is this going to solve? What does this actually help us to achieve? So I think that kind of takes me to a question that I have is, do you see compliance as being like the building block for security?
I think for a field that is I think yes, I do. And like SOC 2 gets a lot of flack, and I don't necessarily agree. I don't agree with the core arguments that people have against SOC 2. It pushes for things like if you really embrace SOC 2, you're going to be a more mature organization. You're going to do things like have job descriptions and performance reviews and background checks and all of these kind of basic functional things that you should probably be doing to run a grown-up company and not a Wild West organization, team of just cronies kind of doing stuff. And like that's a really positive thing. And so I think the as far as like it being a building block, if you come into a new organization and you're just like looking around, there's not really a lot happening on the security or compliance front, and you're just like, all right, what do I fill my days with? What do I do? If you were to take the pure play security approach, it's like, all right, I have to understand my assets. I have to understand the threat landscape, whatever that means. And I have to really be kind of thinking about this differently, as opposed to compliance gives you I think a fairly, easy to wrap your head around roadmap, if you will, around you're going to do stuff in these areas. Take CSF, for example. You're going to be doing stuff in governance and identifying things and protecting things, detecting things, responding to things, and recovering from things. Like, okay, great. That's really easy to wrap your head around. And you're just going to start kind of chipping away at those different areas and raising the floor. And like that will make your organization better. And I think where then you start to, have these conversations of, how much is enough? Is it like, if we get to a certain baseline, like where do we invest further? There I think you can kind of put your security hat on and be thinking about what are your high value assets? What are the most critical functions in the org? Do we have critical vendor risk? Where are the biggest risks? What do those mean to us? And then how do we, kind of optimize around those things and make it better? But I do think there's a lot of validity in that, like compliance as a building blocks thing, regardless of the framework that you're kind of working with.
Yeah, it seemed like too, as you were talking to me, it kind of comes down to like people too, the people running the program. Like if your compliance is being run by an engineer because they were told we have to do this in order to sell work, guess what's going to happen to your like compliance and security at your company? It's just going to be, what do we have to do quickest and cheapest way possible, which is what's happening at a lot of companies. But if somebody like Rob or Kendra's coming in here and they understand both sides of it, I feel like you can use compliance to be that roadmap to building a strong security program. But it really comes from the person leading it, in my opinion. They have to understand how to use compliance to build that roadmap for security. If they don't understand that, it really just will become, what do we have to do to move as fast as possible and get a SOC 2 in 2 weeks and say we're secure? Like, that's what it's boiling down, in my opinion, to, is the person driving it. But I'm curious if you agree with that or what you
No, I do agree with that, and that's what, like when I mentioned earlier, I think you can use compliance like almost as a tool of sorts, like a communication tool. I think it shouldn't be the only tool in your toolbox, but it should certainly be one of them. I think if you can really, well, and maybe I should be careful how I phrase this. It is not an optimal thing, in my opinion. I should avoid absolutes, but it is not an optimal thing, in my opinion, to go in and say we're going to do this because we need to be compliant. Like that, nobody really likes to hear that. But if you can basically say that same thing, but then take it a step further and say something to the effect of, this compliance standard is essential for this P&L in our business. This part of our sales strategy, this set of customers that we're dealing with, they all ask for this thing. And this is essential to making sure that we can relate to them, that we can build trust with them, all of this, that we can kind of clear this hurdle in the sales process, whatever it happens to be. Or, we're going to keep regulators off our backs with HIPAA or PCI, it's a, like, cost of doing business thing. And not doing this thing puts that other thing at risk. So it's not about the compliance, it's about the thing that the compliance enables at the end of it. And being able to understand that as the person driving the program, and then articulate that in a way that doesn't rub people the wrong way and just make it all about the, your box checking, is a really important skill. Because if you neglect that thing that's that the thing behind the thing, then you kind of get locked out of people's headspace. They're like, we can't trust this person to to be running things here. We can't go to them with things. They're just going to make it difficult. You start to get pushed to the edges in the conversations and in the planning and in the like all of that stuff in an org. And we also have as an industry, I think, a really unfortunate tendency to downplay the importance of soft skills and communication and all of that stuff in our field, but it is just so wildly important. If you don't have any influence and no credibility in any of that, in any of the conversations you're going into, you're not going to be that effective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think compliance, like you said, kind of makes it's easy to speak about and people can understand. It can become like a binary outcome, right? Yes, we're compliant. We can do X. No, we can't. So we can't do X. And you can show the ROI, I guess, on getting compliant versus, and you can explain that to the board, right? And
you can tie it to a profit center. You can tie it to business objectives. And that's really important. It's harder to do that with pure play security stuff.
Especially if you're trying to buy a new tool that costs a lot of money and you're just going to say it's going to reduce our risk by X amount. If you're talking about with some like number value, it could save us this much money because our risk of a breach is less because we're going to spend this much money and buy on this tool. Like, I feel like that loses people very quickly too, because they don't, unless you're using like a fair risk assessment model. I don't know much about fair, but I see a lot about it. And it always just confuses me every time I try to learn about it and read about it.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of fair. What I don't love is how I don't feel like they've done a good job of giving people an on ramp to put it into practice in an easy way. Like for the longest time, you had this thing. They were like, oh, it's free, but really, it's almost not free because we're just going to give you this paper, you figure it out. But you can go buy this risk lens tool for like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you could do it that way. I saw on LinkedIn like there was all this fanfare about like somebody releasing a free like Excel spreadsheet implementation of FAIR recently, as though this was like this massive, progressive step forward. And I don't know. I remember learning about FAIR like over 10 years ago, and are we just getting to the point where we got like free tools to do this that aren't just like these kind of fringe open source things that people have built? And so I feel like people, if you've ever seen him on LinkedIn, Mads Boongarden, he's I want to say he's over in Switzerland or the Netherlands. He's got a very simplified approach to doing like quantitative risk modeling, and it's not all steeped in financial loss forecasting, which is also I think an important thing for those folks to keep in. It might be about like modeling downtime or something like that. But I guess regardless, it's a lot. To your point, it is hard to express risk reduction and such unless you're using one of those more like quantitative formula or like methods in the pure play security space, kind of contrasting like security tool purchase and implementation, spend relative to risk reduction.
I think that's similar to even just justifying the impact of a security organization on a company, right? Because unless breach happens, like it's hard to go to your CEO and be like, we're effective. This didn't happen, but should it have if we didn't exist, kind of thing. So I think that's really similar.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, justifying headcount, third-party vendors.
You seem like you're doing well because, and then on the outside you're like, actually, no, there's a lot more that we need here.
Yeah. No, that's actually I love that you brought that up, because for one thing we run into in our in this new capacity that I'm in, let's say we go we're having a conversation about like a penetration test or something, and it's on it's a whole spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, people are like, give me the I'm in the market for the dirt cheapest thing that I can find to call a pen test. And
Kendra's favorite topic, by the way. Just want to let you know that.
All right, I love that. Maybe we'll talk about that. So, give me the most dirt cheap thing I can possibly have that is still called a pen test, versus being like, I want, like, how do I know you did a good job? How do I know I got a good test? How are you going to make me feel comfortable as the buyer that you were thorough, that you covered my needs, that you found all the or found things that needed to be found, that you're going to help my developers on the remediation journey that they're about to go on, all that stuff. And those are you like, for the really high end firms, you could spend 50-60 grand on like a single target web app or like penetration test or more. And on the dirt cheap side of that, you could spend $2,500. There's a lot of room in between there.
There is, and there's a lot of difference in quality. And unfortunately, just because you're paying more doesn't necessarily equate to quality. But Troy, I love how so many of our conversations, like either amongst the three of us or even with guests, have really come back to a very fundamental point, which is maybe some people do want to get out of this as cheaply as humanly possible and check that box. And so I think the heart of what this conversation was supposed to be about is kind of like, how do we get to the point of being able to do more, and explaining that security is more than just checking that compliance box. So I don't know, Troy, do you have any thoughts on how to segue into that?
That's a good question. I mean, I was thinking about asking something similar, just about like, how do you get people to care about security. I mean, like at the board level, security is probably one of 25 things that your CEO is worrying about that day.
Yeah.
Security is just another line item. So how do you?
Every organization should just start with a breach, and then they care, and our jobs are so much easier.
That's true. That's true.
Instead of here, this is probably going to sound kind of wild, but hey, it's GRC Uncensored. I almost now exclusively want to work with vendors who have experienced a breach, because that'll light a fire under your ass, right? From a security perspective, you're going to clean up your act pretty quick.
That's interesting.
Hold on, let me unpack that a little further. Do you want just any old breach, a public breach?
I want a big one. Bigger than that. No, really, like that was obviously said as a joke, but like really, if you think about it, a lot of these organizations who have experienced some sort of breach, maybe before that turning point, they were like, yeah, compliance is good. Like we did the bare minimum. We got that SOC 2, ISO certification, whatever. That makes us secure. And then they realize, oh, that didn't actually make us secure. It checked a box. It was a sales enablement tool. We still got popped. And now we actually have to spend the time to invest in this.
Maybe.
But, I mean, really think back to like the Target breach, right? So like the Target breach happens. They now have one of the strongest security organizations out there.
Yeah.
Like really, they invested very heavily in that because they had to clean up a mess.
Yep. And I think that also comes down to the leadership there. And not to bring it back to that, but if you've got a leader who is able to seize that opportunity, never waste a good crisis sort of thing, and they're able to not because like the pop and fizzle of, oh my God, security, it's scary, this could happen, that will fade away. Like people have short memories, but I think the leaders who are able to, again, bring it back to the thing behind the thing, that is, stock price, reputation, customer trust, regulator pressure, whatever it happens to be. I don't remember explicitly some of the fallout from the Target breach, but I can envision a whole bunch of pressure from the PCI Council and what that ends up meaning. Credit monitoring burden, insurance rates go through the roof, things like that have a kind of an operational and business tilt to them. The security leader talking in those terms, don't talk about all the security stuff, talk about those things. And I think that helps keep the needle and the progress moving forward. But yeah, I do agree about the pressure that or almost like the motivation that a breach can create. Like it's a great litmus test in many ways. I don't think everyone sees it though. That's why I said, not necessarily, or whatever I said a second ago, because sometimes you get those like canned PR statements around, we take our security and privacy of our customers very seriously, and we're looking into all of this stuff, and we're gonna make improvements, and and then they go do another rubber stamp, and then it's like, all right, business as usual.
That's fair. Yeah, that is fair. So basically, I need to just keep my eyes out for organizations who suffer a breach and then post a bunch of security jobs on LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly.
But it sounds like you guys are talking. It kind of reminds me of trying to like security should be almost like your insurance policy of your company, right? We're going to invest in this because if we do invest in it, the cost, if we do experience something, should be lower, right? We're going to offset it because we've done all these other things. I don't want to say security is insurance. I'm just saying, like, when you're talking, it's like, if I'm going to go buy insurance, that's what I'm thinking about, right? Like, how is this going to help me offset the cost if something were to happen, right? That's why I have home insurance, right? Like, my house burns down, I won't be able to afford it, right? So if we buy these tools, A, B, C, and D, and we invest in these things, we should be able to withstand or help mitigate
Some of the losses.
the and the consequences, yes, of a breach. I don't know if people talk in those terms to the board, but again, it kind of comes down to how do you know what those numbers would be?
Yeah.
But
I-
that would be a way for people to understand it better. Like, why are we doing this? The same reason you buy insurance. Why do you do that?
Yeah, I think that's actually a fair way to look at security, to be completely honest, because kind of going back to my previous comment of going to the CEO at the end of the year where they're like, okay, what did you accomplish? What did you do for me aside from just cost me a whole bunch of money? Security at the end of the day is a cost center. We're not necessarily seen as a part of the organization that's bringing in revenue. We're costing revenue. And so if you can put it into the perspective of kind of an insurance policy, and it, we've all heard the phrase, it's not if, but when a breach is going to occur. And we want to be able to lessen that impact as much as humanly possible and make sure that our response is adequate for our customers to have some level of trust and transparency into our processes. And, like for myself as a consumer of all these various services, like when I'm signing up for something, I have no expectation that the data they have of mine is going to be safe and secure forever. I know the risks when I'm signing up for these sorts of things. What matters to me the most is, are you at least doing a best effort of trying to secure that data? And at the end of the day, if and when the bad thing happens, what is your response to that going to be? Like, are you going to try and sweep it under the rug, or are you going to do your best to try and clean this up and make it as least impactful to me as humanly possible?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like the insurance analogy a lot. I was listening to something just last night about this, and is the spirit of the comments were effectively like, if you're paying for like fire insurance or flood insurance on your house, and like you go 5 years, you're making those payments, every month, every year, whatever it is, and nothing happens, is that money wasted? Perhaps not, because the second that you do get flooded, or tree falls in your house, or fire, or whatever, it's all immediately worth it, because you're going to be able to not be bankrupt as a result. And I think that, and of course it's more, it's a little more challenging for us in this field. I don't want to degrade or take away from the, some of the forecasting stuff that insurance does, but it's different, maybe is a better word, because we then have to go back to that, how much is enough? Like, you could spend in a small company 500,000 on security between headcount, tools, etc., and maybe that's more than enough. Or you could spend 2 million. What's the balance? And that's a really hard question to answer. And that's where I think the bringing it back to compliance is really helpful, because the compliance stuff is the cost of doing business. And if you have a baseline of sorts that is centered around how you get to that point where you are, quote, compliant, then that will at least let you establish some level of what's the floor for my security spending. What does it need to be given the size of my organization, the number of products I have, how complex we are, the industry we're in, all that stuff, like all those things that are kind of inputs into the general like compliance cost or compliance level of effort needed.
I mean, the way I viewed it is really security is reducing risk. That's the goal of security and compliance is to compliance has other goals, I guess, right? Sales enablement and other things. But security at its core is to reduce risk and build customer trust, or build, trust with your stakeholders. So when you say, should we spend 500 or 2 million, it's how much coverage should I have for a cyber insurance policy? Should it be 1 million, 2 million, 5 million? I think you're asking almost the same questions. And it's like, how much would a breach cost our company? Who can answer that question? Maybe the insurance people are the best people to ask this question. Okay, I'm going to you. How much coverage do you, like, what is your risk? If you were to insure me for cyber, like, what would a breach cost, do you think? Like, I feel like the insurance companies know this or have answers to these questions. And I feel like if security people had that data too, they might be able to have more informed conversations. Be like, companies like us, typically a breach is going to cost us X amount of money if it were to occur. Are we willing to spend X amount of money to, to reduce that risk from from ever happening? Or do we want to spend less money? But I think you have to kind of boil it down to some type of risk appetite and risk and numbers and ROI in order for the board to understand why they're investing in security. And I don't know any other way to do that other than telling them, hey, a breach is going to cost us potentially this much. Here's where I got these numbers. What are we willing to spend on that risk or take?
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, cyber insurance is just risk transference, right? So having that $5 million insurance policy, because that's what the insurance actuaries have determined the cost of the breach could potentially be, or that's what your contracts with your clients say that you need to carry in order for them to sign the contract. Like, at the end of the day, that's just the transference of risk. So, I mean, the compliance in my mind should be the building block, right? Like, I've joined several organizations where SOC 2 was the goal. That's why they brought me in. They were like, we know that we need this in order to enable our sales process. Help us just check these boxes and get this piece of paper as quickly as possible. But then I've also joined other organizations where they're like, we know we need to be secure. And I'm like, okay, cool. But let's take a step back and think of like how we can make this something tangible at the end. And so I'll direct them towards like SOC 2. Hey, let's put these building blocks in place to make sure that as we're building this program, we have something tangible that you can get at the end of this, which is only going to help demonstrate to your customers in the long run that you're trying to take this seriously. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I think it's important that the call out around insurance being risk transference is really important, because there's a lot of ways to deal with risk. You can accept it, and that's also an okay thing. And Troy, to your point, the whole, you got to get in and quantify, have a numbers conversation at some level, I think is also quite accurate. I don't think it has to be like a big fancy thing though. I think, we start talking about numbers and then the conversation immediately jumps over to, data science worthy, modeling and forecasting and all this like fancy stuff, these techniques. And I don't think it has to be nearly that complicated. But then at the same time, the data that we have kind of sucks around like what a breach actually costs. There's like, I remember early in my career, like when I left consulting initially and went into doing security at startups, I remember trying to do this thing, and I was like, I'd go to like the Ponemon Institute or whatever, and we're in healthcare, so it's going to cost $100 a record if we get breached, and okay, we're working with self-insured employers and CMS, and so we have about 100 million records or something like that. It makes any security incident seem just like these absolute doomsday events. Yeah. And it's realistically, if we get breached, it's probably not going to cost, $1 billion or, like that seems unlikely. However, it probably will be a near catastrophic thing for a small company, depending on the size and scope of it.
I was thinking too, while you're doing that, like risk transference, back to what Kendra said, yes, it is, but you still want to do things to reduce your risk, right? Like just because I have home insurance doesn't mean I'm not going to have smoke detectors in my house, right? Yeah. Or do things to like, because I don't want to lose my house. So you don't want, so I kind of think about it. Cyber insurance is one way to reduce that risk, but the board or the leadership has to understand that you still want to do things, because even if you get a major breach, your house could still go away, right? I mean,
yep,
it's going to cover rebuilding. I don't know what it would cover I guess cyber insurance is just one way to reduce risk. It's not the only way.
Yeah,
that's true.
So I don't want people to listen and be like, oh, just Just
Just
get
get insurance and you're
insurance,
fine.
so we're covered, right? We don't need to worry about security.
Yeah,
Well,
but it's like you can't even get insurance without having, you know, like the rates are so high these days that, you know, the floor or the barrier to entry to even get insurance is climbing. I just posted this link into the chat. It's called "How Material Is That Hack?"
I didn't,
And
I didn't even know we could do.
it's this
Look at
it's a
that.
thing that the Fair Institute pulled together. Ironically, I was shaming the fair people a little bit ago, but I should clarify. I do actually love the fair model. I just think they dropped the ball on making it more accessible. But they pulled together this site, which I love, and so they'll take these public breaches and do like an impact assessment and then post it all up. So it's like you can kind of
Yeah, that's cool.
baseline. Like if you pull up the second one on the site, CDK Global, and this is not to shame any company that's gone through a breach, but you know the forecasted impact is in the range of 28 million to 41 million. It's okay. You know, I don't know anything about this breach, you know, how many records were impacted or anything like that, you know, unless I go through and read this. But, you know, thinking about that number and the level of investment that, you know, so let's say you're an organization of a similar size and similar business, similar industry. It's okay. This is what could happen in, you know, if we get hit. We have a certain amount of insurance, and then we have our kind of, you know, our smoke detectors and stuff like that at the house. You know, we have our investment, and it's, you know, you can kind of start to back your way into between here's the compliance floor that we have to do business. Here's the, you know, here's all of these impacts and these, you know, big lofty things that we have to be thinking about. And then here's this other investment, you know, this residual risk that might be hanging out there that's above and beyond compliance or whatever. And you kind of like start to weave these threads together when you have this level of insight, which is great.
That's a cool site.
It's a super cool site. I saw somebody post about it on LinkedIn forever ago, and I've been using it ever since because it's so novel. I feel, you know, like compared to this amount of money per record, like this is so much more useful.
Yeah, I saw the United Healthcare one is 2.2 billion, but their stock is actually flat over the last year. I just looked that up too, and I think the breach occurred about a little over a year ago. I think February of 2024, which is interesting. You could pay.
Yeah, that is
I mean, they're a huge company. I get it. 2 billion might not be material from a financial perspective, but it's still interesting to think about that. You could have a breach that cost $2 billion, and your stock price over the last year is pretty much flat.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that one is I'd be curious to know how that particular analysis was done, because so I was still the CISO at CMS when that Change Healthcare thing happened, and there was a lot of kind of like concentric rings of disruption, if you will, across the industry around like Change Healthcare not being available. You know, there's all of this confusion around basically like how do we do claims and payments and all that, you know, all of this stuff. And so I wonder like how much of that 2 point whatever billion was their cost or impact of, you know, at United Healthcare versus, and was it like opportunity cost that was then made up later, or was it cost of the breach, you know, spread across the healthcare industry? I don't know, because that one in particular had a big splash.
Had a wide net.
Yep.
They also had to report it because of the SEC rules.
Yep.
So I think they had to. You know what was interesting about that one though? So, you know how like you're supposed to say if it's a material incident, right?
Mm-hmm.
They never reissued an 8K saying that it would have a material impact on their financials, which I always thought was interesting. It's okay, so this $2 billion breach that affected a third of the U.S. population and had this dramatic impact was not a material financial impact to your company. No? Okay, cool. Then what is? I mean, if that isn't, then what would it? They could never have a bigger breach, in my opinion, or breach or outage or, you know, incident that causes. If that's not material to their financials, then whatever will be to their
Yeah, the material thing is interesting, and you know that's probably a very, you know, bringing it back to our our first focus, or like our what brought us here, is there's a very personal dynamic in every company, in every organization, around like risk appetite and investment appetite and all of that. I've been in startups that similar amounts of funding that have there's been like a 10x spread on security investment, and that's like just bananas to me. Part of it was maybe the way that I was able to articulate it or connect with, because these were organizations that like I was running security, but like the way that I was able to like connect with whoever it was that was holding the purse strings. But very, very, very different risk appetites in these different places, and that is just really interesting when when you like contrast that to to this compliance conversation, and like how much compliance is enough, and the 2 week give me a SOC 2 conversation versus the we're going to really take this seriously and go deep. We're going to we're really going to think deeply about each and every control and make sure that it's functioning properly. And that's it's interesting.
I would guess probably goes back to what Kendra said about for a company that had a breach. I bet if you look at the backgrounds of those leaders and where they came from or what organizations they were a part of before, security might have been important at those organizations for a certain reason. And when they got here, they're like, okay, that should be important to us. That would be my guess. It's probably past experience is probably driving that. But we've been talking for an hour already. Wow. Okay. Sorry.
I actually have a question for you guys. I'm curious with like given the whole how much is enough thing. Do you feel like like our controls functioning properly? Do you feel like the introduction of more and more of these like compliance platforms are making it harder to do like basic checkboxes because they're a little bit more, objective? The machine doesn't have feelings and all of that. It's just more data driven.
Kendra loves this.
Personally, I kind of think the opposite. I think that these automation compliance tools are making it easier for us to say that checking the box is good enough, because I think there's a strong belief that the tools are smarter than people, and that we should just take this data that it's spitting out and that green check mark and say, this is good enough. So I actually think it's making it easier for us to rely on a checkbox methodology for compliance.
I'm gonna just say I agree. What do you think, Rob?
I actually I agree too, but I figured I'd toss a little conversation and see what happens.
No, why?
Throw him another grenade.
Actually, it comes back to everything we talked about, actually, to be honest. Like, it's just the people driving it all, right? I mean, if you just want the dirty, cheap, get me done as fast as possible, give me the lowest cost auditor, I don't care about this. Yeah, the tool's great. Yep. I think it's good. And the tool can be good for people that want to use it the right way, too, that have mature programs. But it comes down, I think what's happening is it's the former, right? It's the people that just want to use these tools quick, dirty, get them done. Yeah. There are people that are actually using the tools that have mature programs that are leveraging it as a tool.
Yeah, as a way to like
security. It just doesn't get the noise. It doesn't get the clicks. Doesn't make noise in the social media space. But there are companies using it the right way. Just the scale and the speed of the companies that are using it, I will say, a different way, are getting more clicks and more prominence. And
I mean, that's true. Yeah, who doesn't want to get through all the pain? Eat all the broccoli you're ever going to have to eat in 2 weeks and be done with it forever, and just move on.
Yeah. What I think would be a really interesting website at some point. I don't know how this would ever come to be a thing, but similar to the SSO tax, or like the back in the day, like the 2FA wall of shame thing. It would be amazing to have a site that listed customers of these automation platforms who, at the time of suffering a breach, showed all green check marks.
I feel like
we should do that for compliance in general.
Oh yeah, yeah.
like
Like
that
I've
would
seen
be
people
interesting.
pull that stuff together. FedRAMP companies who have, but like the platform thing is interesting. In particular because they're like doing a full blown manual audit. There's a lot more like subjectivity in that. But in theory, you should that subjectivity should not exist in the platform play. So
But I do think, to be fair, it should be not people. It should be a general though. Like, I guess it could call out like, hey, we were using the platform, it said this, but it should also have ones on there that didn't use platforms and we're doing it a different way. That's so you have a fair, because like it's one thing to say that's bad, but maybe it wasn't any better. I don't know that. So that'd be interesting. It's actually a very interesting.
that would be.
I know if you ask High Trust, they will say their framework has saved everyone from being breached.
Also, I learned something about high trust that I did not. I don't know how I didn't know this, but that if you get breached after you have your high trust, that it like invalidates your high trust. That you have to, and I have to go back and like reference that, but like the I don't know if they call it officially a certification, but like your kind of like stamp is considered not valid if you experience a breach after you've gotten like you're in your approval window and you have to get it like rechecked.
Is there like
You go from high trust to low trust.
low trust? Is there like is there like a threshold though?
I don't know.
Like that seems, yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, it is interesting. I mean, it's a great business model, but at the same time, I part of me really appreciates that. I have to go verify that, of course, but I've heard it. I've been told that from a number of different people who are in high trust, like accredited orgs, and so I haven't gone and read it myself, but it's like if something like that were to exist, let's say for SOC 2 or ISO or whatever, like would that change some of this, kind of like behavior that we're talking about?
Yeah. So it's safe to say that United Health Group is not high trust certified anymore.
Or at least, maybe they
I'm
got.
trying to look it up actually to see if I don't know. They have so many different business units. It's kind of hard.
Oh yeah, I mean the company's huge too.
Change
So
Healthcare, I think, was the name. But actually, in SOC 2, technically, if there's like an incident, I mean, it could be security incident, it could be availability incident, whatever, and it actually impacts like your commitments to customers that you made, right? If it was like, or a material incident that maybe like you had to tell customers about and it occurred within the audit period, technically you're supposed to put it in the system description and disclose it. But so I usually tell you, like, did you have a reportable? Was it reportable? Did you have an incident that you had to report to regulators, that you had to inform customers about? Did you have an availability incident that forced you to not meet your SLAs? Because like CKS. So if CKS had a SOC 2 report, they would probably have to disclose their huge outage that they had, right? Because that impacted customers in a lot of ways, and they probably didn't meet their availability commitments technically, right? During that audit period, because of that. So you're supposed to put that in the description, the system description, and disclose that.
which I know everyone is reading thoroughly.
Yes, they are reading it, and
Yeah.
or they're going to use the many AI tools that are trying to be built to read the SOC report and tell you exactly if it's low or high quality and grade it. And on that note, who'd you pick for March? Who'd you pick to win it all, Rob? This will probably go live maybe after the tournament, maybe right when the championship is. So be careful. If you pick somebody that loses in the first round, everyone's going to know.
Yeah. So I picked Duke personally.
Okay, so ChatGPT picked Duke. Rob picked Duke. I have 45 minutes and I would change my Duke pick because I just don't trust it. I don't trust it anymore.
I mean, that's valid.
Elliot, who did you pick?
All right. Just to be clear, I don't know shit about any of these, and I always just pick Gonzaga because I went there. So that is what I do.
You wait,
And I
you
know
picked
fully well they
Gonzaga?
will not win. Yeah.
Wow. That would have been, I would never have guessed. You're the first person ever that I've ever known. Other than, what's his name? The basketball player.
Well, of course, he's a basketball player. That's
No,
all,
Utah Jazz.
all anyone knows.
Oh my gosh. The point guard for the Utah Jazz. What's his name? Most famous? Oh my gosh.
I only know hockey.
Oh my gosh.
And not even well at that.
Hold on.
See, this is why I did not participate in the March Madness. I did a fantasy football league with my family one time, and I picked the players solely based off of how they looked.
Stockton.
And my dad was like, "You picked the wrong kind of fantasy team." I was like, "Ah, damn it."
SD football.
Living
I
up to our
misunderstood.
podcast title.
It was John Stockton, by the way. That's for all the NBA fans out there. Carmel John Stockton. You don't wait, Elliot. You went to Gonzaga. You don't know what John Stockton is?
No, of course not. I did educational
I don't
stuff.
understand.
I wasted my mind at my undergrad. The
I'm like-
master's program was for actual use.
Okay, so who'd you pick to go to the Final Four? So I know not to pick them either. Now that I know you don't know who John Stockton is.
I guess Gonzaga is up there. I have not picked any of them this year because I just have been too lazy.
All right. And Duke.
Welcome to the crew, Rob.
Yep.
Love it. I
It
love
was
it.
fun though. Appreciate joining. It was fun.
Yeah, no, I love conversations like this. I appreciate the time.
All right. That takes us to the end of the episode. Maybe. I'm pretty sure this is going to air after the championship. Duke hopefully will win. And yeah. All right. That's it. See you next
Don't
time.
take my word for it.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for listening to GRC Uncensored, the podcast, where Troy and Kendra know their shit, and our producer just talks shit. To learn more about GRC, go to grcuncensored.com, subscribe to our newsletter, or join our community on Reddit. Viewpoints expressed during the show do not reflect the brands, employers, or companies of our hosts, guests, or sponsors.
Comply.